Let me just, first of all, welcome everyone and just say on behalf of several organizations on campus, the Middle East Students Initiative, Global Peace and Conflict Studies, the International Studies Center, the Middle East and Africa Faculty Working Group, and others, that we are very happy to have Ibrahim Houdaiby here, who is, as the announcement, at least in my mind, as the announcement depicts him, a rising intellectual voice in Egypt, and one that comes from a very important place, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's not the only place he's speaking from. I don't think you define yourself only as someone who's in the Muslim Brotherhood, but he's certainly, that's one of the spaces that he's coming from and speaking from, and it's a space that's very, very important for us to hear from today. And I'll tell you how I met him, and then I'll tell you what happened when people found out he was coming. I was in Egypt last time in December of 2006, researching my book, Heavy Metal Islam, about rock and hip-hop and youth culture in the Middle East. And I called some contacts in the Brotherhood that I knew and said I'd love to meet with one of your younger members, someone who's a young activist and who speaks for a younger generation. And they said, okay, someone will call me. And I was at my hotel with some metal musicians that I know. And we were sitting there, and all of a sudden I got a call from someone named Ibrahim. And he said he was here to meet me. And I thought he was another metalhead. So I told him where the hotel was. And he comes walking in. And he's actually very well dressed like this. He didn't look like a metalhead, that's for sure. Not long hair, no Iron Maiden t-shirt or anything. And he introduced himself and said he was Ibrahim, and he's from the Ikhwan, or the Muslim Brotherhood. And the two metalheads I was sitting with, their faces went completely blank. Right? It was quite, well, I don't know, I don't think they thought it was funny. But it was quite, I was very happy, because I've been trying for 3 continents to bring together metalheads and religious activists, especially from something like the Muslim Brotherhood, into the same space. But the metalheads were not too happy. Ibrahim, you didn't mind. I don't think that they were metalheads. The metalheads were not that happy, and partly with good reason, because there was a big satanic metal scare in Egypt in 1997, and the Grand Mufti actually said the metalheads should be executed if they don't repent from apostasy, and so the metalheads have a reason to be suspicious, and Ibrahim was the first to admit it. But what was interesting is that he was happy to sit and talk to them, and actually there was one of the metalheads, almost the exact same biography as Ibrahim, same age, went to AUC, has a job in the IT sector, very similar, but very much unwilling to talk. And that to me is part of the problem, that in Egypt today, in many cases, you have a new generation of religious activists who are in fact more open and tolerant than many of the secular parties are. And what do you do about that? And what does that mean? And how is that actually resolving itself? So I talk about that a lot in the book. I won't talk about it here. But that's what Ibrahim represents. And that's why when I found out that he was going to be here in the US, in DC, I thought it would be great to bring him here. And he's been speaking at some universities in the US and have our students and there's a growing interest in the Middle East studies here in the Middle East, to actually speak to someone who's from your peer group, your age group, who's been through many of the things we've been through, and who comes at these problems from a very unique perspective that needs to be one that's heard more and more, one that is both inside and outside this religion, secular dichotomy that still causes so many problems. So that's why Ibrahim's here. What's interesting is to look at the reaction when word got around that he's coming. He knew about it before I did. He said, it seems I've caused you a lot of trouble a couple of days ago, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And then I started Googling, and some very interesting stories about Ibrahim were, have been on, oh, here's a good one. Let's see. Yes. The Terrorism Awareness Project. UC Irvine invites member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then it goes on. The Muslim Brotherhood is an extremely repressive group. This organization aims to impose brutal Sharia law and engage in violence against democratic nations. In other words, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt is basically against us. Right? It sounds like it was written by Sarah Palin. Maybe this is she seems to always like to get some extra money in the evening, so she may have been moonlighting writing the copy for this. But and then it goes on to say Haj Amin al-Husseini, of course, the infamous leader of the Brotherhood in Palestine in the 20s through 40s, who was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, which clearly Haj Amin is your brother or something, right? I don't know. Or there's a direct relationship between him and Husseini and Said Qutb, and all this idea that the Brotherhood, that he somehow is linked directly to this tradition, which I think this will be a good opportunity to hear if that's in fact the case. But there was other websites, Muslims Against Sharia, which, what did they call you?
Terrorist on campus.
A terrorist on campus. He's a terrorist on campus. And more and more, and you know, it's just interesting that this is the kind of discourse, you know, when I invited him to come talk about what it's like to be a young person struggling for democracy in Egypt right now, in a situation where you have this corrupt, very oppressive government, you have the religious secular tensions, you have the problems of the US sponsorship of the regime, you have globalization, you have all these issues, but how it got turned around, and then Front Page Magazine wrote a nice little article basically getting every fact possible wrong about his presence here and what I had said, and it goes on and on. So it just shows you how even to have a discussion about the Middle East and about what's happening internally in Egypt, how it's so easily turned into Islam versus the West. It's a war. And he's a terrorist. Of course, if he's a terrorist, once again, I'm a terrorist supporter, which is not the first time that I've been called that. But it's interesting to see how this whole discourse unfolds, and how even when it has nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with Iraq, nothing to do with U.S. foreign policy in the first instance, right, how this automatically takes over. And this is exactly what I hope his presence here can help dispel. And I hope that with his talk and our discussions with him, we can move on and start hearing really what's going on the ground in Egypt today, which is of crucial importance, right, to Middle East policy by the U.S., to policy, to the struggles for democracy, to the struggles against terrorism, because if voices like his are shut out and others like it, it's going to be very, very difficult for there to be anyone to speak to, right, about this. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Ibrahim, and he will talk for about 30 minutes, 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. And at 2:30, I'll have to be very strict about that. We'll have to end, and those of you who want to continue, like I said, at 4 o'clock at 200E, have a more informal setting, just where students can ask questions. What is it like to be a college student in Egypt? What's happening with the struggles on campus at AUC or Cairo University? Any kind of other issues that you have? What is it like to be a religious activist and secular activist? Whatever. So please, anyone who wants to continue, please come to that at 4 o'clock.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for being there. I hope you have a good day. Actually, I don't like giving long speeches. I'm more like, I prefer discussions, so I was planning to keep this short and have longer Q&A session. But Mark even made it harder for me because of this introduction. So yes, I was called a terrorist and a radical for being here, but interestingly, I really liked being called that because that made a balance for me. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article for Islam Online, an Arabic website. Part of the reaction that I got for this article was being called an infidel and a CIA agent and a traitor. So I mean, when you get this from the extreme right wing there and this from the extreme right wing here, you probably know you're at least on the right track. If not perfectly on the right track, then you're close. Secondly, about being here, what I'm doing here, I'm a board member of ikhwanweb.com. That's the Muslim Brotherhood's official English language website. And part of the main objectives why this website was established is that we wanted people to hear us, to know what we say about ourselves. Because for so long, this has been a deficit in the Brotherhood that we did not reach out for the people to tell them what we stand for and who we are and what are our objectives and our values and so forth. And the Egyptian regime has been doing that on our part. And of course, the Egyptian regime has an interest in portraying its strongest political opponent in the country as a radical group, so as to legitimize its crackdown on opposition at large, its assault on democracy and democracy activists in Egypt, which is not limited to its largest opposition group, the Muslim Brotherhood, but also goes to almost all other opposition groups and activists in the country. So what is the Muslim Brotherhood? The Muslim Brotherhood is an Islamic movement that was established in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna. It had three main objectives. The first of which is resisting foreign occupation. Egypt was at that time an occupied country under British occupation. The second objective was restoring Islamic unity, and that developed to be having some sort of unity amongst Muslim countries, something that could be I mean, the best way of that is something that's similar to the EU. We have an existing organization which is called the Organization of Islamic Conference that has all Muslim countries as members of it. So an empowerment of that would stand as another objective for the group. And the third is restoring and reviving renewing Islamic jurisprudence and restoring Islamic order. There are 7 main objectives of Sharia. I'd go briefly over that, and I know Sharia would be a question that would have to come up later, but I'd start by going briefly over that. There are 7 main objectives of Sharia. The first is reforming beliefs. The second is asserting human dignity and human rights, especially for the vulnerable. The third is building the Muslim family and bringing justice to women. The fourth is purifying the human soul. The fifth is building a nation that would stand up as an example. The sixth is calling for an international دعوة إلى عالم إنساني متعاون, calling for more human international relations with higher levels of cooperation. And I forgot the 7th, which always happens that I never get the 7. I always forget 1 or 2, which is fine. I mean, I will remember it at some point. The Brotherhood is a mainstream Islamic movement. It is clearly the largest and most important non-violent Islamic movement in the Middle East. We have a moderate and our platform that we present for reform is based on the acceptance of the democratic system that is pillared on political pluralism, party pluralism, acceptance of civil democracy. We adopt a gradual approach for achieving our purposes. We reject and have a moral stance against the use of violence for political purposes. We are actually, the Brotherhood is the grassroots correspondent to a movement, an intellectual movement that started earlier, around 50 years before the establishment of the group. It started by Gamal al-Din al-Afghani, Muhammad Abdu, Rashid Rida, Al-Kawakbi, Qasim Amin, all those people. Their ideas brought new life into the Islamic jurisprudence and Islamic thought, upon which the Brotherhood was later on established in 1928. Currently, the Brotherhood started engaging in the political life in Egypt as early as the 1930s and the 1940s, but it only started engaging in direct politics, I mean parliament elections and so forth, in the 1980s. It won 4 seats in the 1984, 4 or 5 seats in the 1984 elections, 36 seats in the 1987 elections. We boycotted the 1991 elections. We got only 1 seat, which was the only seat for opposition groups in 1995 elections, and that was by mistake, by the way. And the state security apparatus officer the plan was to manipulate the results, but he did it in a wrong way, and he mixed the candidates' names. So the Brotherhood's candidate won, and he was punished for that, the officer. But that was the only opposition group member who was able to make it to the parliament in 1995. In 2000, we had 2000 elections. We had 17 candidate parliamentarians, which was the largest bloc. And in 2005, we had 88 of our candidates winning seats in the parliament. We had 159 candidates, 88 won seats. And according to Prime Minister Ahmed Nazif, who made a statement to the Newsweek saying that had the regime not manipulated the results, 40 more members of the Brotherhood would have won seats in the parliament. 88 seats is 20% of the total 454 seats in the Egyptian parliament. We stand as the strongest opposition group in the country, which we realize puts a lot of burden and responsibility on our shoulders to reach out for other opposition groups, other minorities, and rally for their interests and their rights. We are the largest charity and community. We have the largest charity and community service networks in the country. Clearly, in Egypt, they are mostly associated with the Brotherhood, such activities, and we have strong presence in professional syndicates. I know syndicates is not a nice word to use in the States. You call it professional unions, I think. So, or is it unions? Yes. And that's about it. After winning the 88 seats in the 2005 elections, the Egyptian regime felt threatened by the rise of and the overwhelming popularity of the Brotherhood. So it started a strategy of harsh crackdown on the Brotherhood, and that included two main objectives. The first is to prevent the group from winning any further grounds in the Egyptian political system. To do so, the Egyptian regime passed some constitutional amendments that were attempted to marginalize the presence of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Egyptian political arena. But they were very dangerous amendments because they allowed for more crackdown on opposition. I mean, they passed the new anti-terrorist bill. Actually, that's extremely dangerous in a country like Egypt, where the president is the ultimate decision maker in anything. So it just gave the president, between the lines, this bill gives the president the right to transfer any suspect on any case to a military tribunal. So being transferred to a military tribunal is a huge issue in Egypt because military tribunals are practically would find you guilty with whatever the regime wants to find you guilty with, and this has been proven in several occasions, and they have been found unconstitutional in several verdicts, but these have never been implemented in Egypt. Again, the second thing is restricting the judicial supervision over elections. One of the main reasons for the rise of the number of opposition activists and members of opposition groups being able to make it to the parliament and to the upper house starting 2000 is that there was a Supreme Constitutional Court's verdict in 2000 that asserted that every ballot box should have a judge supervising it because results were manipulated. I mean, what used to happen early on, and I know about that because my grandfather used to run in elections, so I used to follow that a lot. You'd post your ballot, and the box is full of all your choices, but then it goes somewhere else, and another box is replaced with that one, and that's the one that's counted. That is what used to happen prior to 2000. So having the judicial supervision really restricted the ability to manipulate elections, although they were still manipulated in different ways, but I mean it became much harder to manipulate. The chances of having higher degrees of fairness in elections were there. So that's why that's basically why the judicial supervision was restricted. And the third very important thing that happened was prohibiting any political practices on religious basis, and that is not dangerous from a Muslim Brotherhood perspective. It only becomes very dangerous when you see the larger picture of the political system in Egypt. In Egypt, we do not have autonomy of religious institutes. The president of the country selects and appoints the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar. He appoints the Grand Mufti. He appoints the Minister of Endowments, and he appoints the Egyptian Pope, or the Pope of the Egyptian Church. So that's complete monopoly of state over religious institutes. So with this monopoly, the state, the president, most importantly, makes a decision on what is religiously correct and what is religiously not correct. Those institutes are portrayed as the authentic religious institutes of the country, and the president appoints those who head these institutes. And then he makes another decision on what is correct or not correct should go to the public sphere. If there is something that he wants to see in the public sphere, he has the second article of the Egyptian constitution, which states that Islamic Sharia is the prime source of legislation. So he could have that in the public sphere. If it's something he doesn't want to have in the public sphere, he has Article 5 of the Egyptian constitution, which prohibits the practice of any political activities on religious basis. And actually, it's very interesting to see that to pass this amendment, it was violated to be passed. I mean, the president had on TV Sheikh al-Azhar, Grand Sheikh al-Azhar, the Grand Mufti, the Egyptian Pope Shenouda, on TV calling for people to go and vote for the amendment. So this is in itself a violation of this clause that was added to Article 5 of the Egyptian constitution. I just don't want to go too much there. So what happened was that the constitutional amendments were meant to marginalize the presence of the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, of the opposition groups at large, but most importantly, the Muslim Brotherhood. The second element of preventing the group from winning further grounds was postponing and manipulating other elections. You had the upper house elections; they were manipulated. Very harsh crackdown from the security apparatus on candidates and supporters alike. Not a single member of the Brotherhood was able to make it to the upper house. And I mean, it's just silly to see how in 2005, 88 members win in elections, and then only a couple of years later, none is able to make it. It doesn't even make any sense. A year later, the municipal elections were manipulated, but that was an upgrade in the level of manipulation, because they didn't allow candidates to submit their files to run in the elections, which is taking it even a step further. They did not need to do any violations on the day of elections, because everything was ready from days and weeks before. The second strategy is to push back. If the first part is to prevent the Brotherhood from winning further grounds, the second part is to push back the Brotherhood, which is done through three main streams of activities. The first is media manipulation campaigns. The second is the arrest of key on-ground leaders, whether top leaders or leaders in different provinces and governorates of Egypt, active leaders of the Brotherhood. And the third is freezing the financial resources. Actually, the first two, I could see a high level of success there by the arrests and the media manipulation campaign. But for the third one, the Muslim Brotherhood does not have financial institutions. In 1952 or 1953, I can't recall, and of course I wasn't living at that time, so I don't know for sure. Nasser's regime cracked down on the financial institutions of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that caused a major problem for the group at the time. And ever since, we have learned the historical lesson of not having financial institutions. We don't have lots of costs. We don't have heavy costs. So whenever we need, there is an event that deserves to be funded or something, we just raise funds for this events and from amongst the members, and that's it. But just to be sure here, this confrontation between the Egyptian regime and the Muslim Brotherhood is part of a larger confrontation between the Egyptian regime and opposition groups in the country. The same regime that is claiming to be a secular regime, cracking down on its Islamist opposition, is claiming to be an Islamic regime cracking down on its secular opposition when it arrests Karim Amir, the secular blogger. And when I support him, when I issue a statement supporting Karim Amir because of his arrest, the Egyptian regime tries to portray me as someone who's against Islamic principles. The same regime that is cracking down on the Muslim Brotherhood is arresting, amongst those who are in prison right now, is Ayman Noor, who ranked second in the Egyptian presidential elections of 2005. Nu'man Gum'a, he was there for some time, but he was released, who ranked third in these elections. Who ranked fifth or sixth, I can't recall, died in a car accident. So, and there were only 10 candidates, and one of them was over 90 years old, so there is no fear of that guy. And the same regime is sending Dr. Saad ad-Din Ibrahim, who is my professor, he's a professor of political sociology at AUC. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but he was not in the country and he is not yet back to Egypt. It is the same regime that is sending 4 independent newspaper editors to long terms in prison, and is sending Ibrahim Isa, the editor of the independent Dustur newspaper, to a couple of months in prison. And then when there's pressure to stop that, a couple of days ago, President Mubarak issued a presidential pardon for the case of Ibrahim Isa, which is, yani, that's it actually. The last thing Mark asked me to talk about is how is it like to be a young activist fighting for democracy in Egypt. Actually, I think that one of the I have a few stories that I think might be revealing about the nature of the political culture in Egypt and how things are. For so long, one of the main problems of Egypt, if you ask me why Egypt doesn't see democracy, I will tell you there are 2 sets of problems. First is the internal conflict between different opposition groups in the country, and we have repeatedly failed to come together to form strong alliances to push for real reform. And the second is the international support that Mubarak's regime gets in its crackdown on its opposition groups in Egypt. So the second part of the international support, that's to be discussed later, but what it means to be a young activist in Egypt, this has to do with that. For so long, the leaders of the opposition groups in Egypt were incapable of coming together because they were brought up at an age, at a time when there were very high levels of mutual skepticism between different ideological groups in the country. So they had real hard time coming together, working across the lines of different ideologies and so forth. And this is why this generation of leaders have repeatedly failed to come together and work politically together. I mean, you have all different types of disputes within the same line of thought even. You have Al-Wafd party versus Al-Ghad party, the Muslim Brotherhood versus Al-Wasat, Al-Karama versus Al-Nasiri. So it's, and every dispute comes from within the same school of thought. Again, that was primarily because of the lack of common trust between individuals leading these groups. In 2005, Egypt had a moment of democracy. In 2005, we were trying to utilize that. I was still at school at that time, and I was, along with another student, negotiating on behalf of the Brotherhood with student activists from different groups in Egypt, the formation of an alliance for Egyptian student activists at universities. If you look at this anatomy of this activist student body in Egypt, you'd find out that more than 90% of that are Muslim Brotherhood activists. But we were able to reach an agreement whereby each and every one of the 8 political groups that were on the table negotiating would have equal voting powers. We were able to negotiate an agreement by which our common activities would be purely political activities, nothing social and nothing religious, would be purely political activities. And at the same time, we were trying to work on investing in the personal relations between young activists in different groups. So we'd call people from Al-Wafd party, ask them to invite us for at their headquarters and give us a lecture about what their political party stands for, and go into discussions, and then we'd go out later and start and have dinner together or have lunch together or whatever. And of course, we could never invite them over to the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood, because if they do, they probably won't get out of there except to prison or something. But we invite them to places, I mean, research centers and so forth, where we'd again discuss things, and that's how it went. The fruits of that appeared a couple of years later. Some of the fruits of that, and not only of that, but of that and other things that were taking place at the same time. I mean, it was a year of openness, so everybody was able to attend lecture. I mean, we went to lectures and seminars by different political activists from across the political spectrum in Egypt. We listened to what they had to say. We discussed. We engaged in debates and dialogues. A more tolerant atmosphere grew at that time. So later on, the next year, Muslim Brotherhood's campaign for its student activities was, and the campaign is usually a social religious campaign, but for that year the campaign was entitled بإيدينا نكون أحرار جامعة حرة وطن حر. Our freedom is in our hands, a free university, a free country. The next year, this entire blogosphere thing started, and anybody who's following the internet activism in Egypt would realize that we do pretty much work across ideologies and across thoughts and across party lines and everything. So we have most of the younger, my generation would have strong relations with each other that are not based on ideology but are based on our belief in a common goal of reforming Egypt, our ability to come together to a set of clear objectives and a framework in which we could function together to bring justice and bring democracy to Egypt at real hard times we are passing through right now. So things are improving, but I think we still have a long way to go in terms of rebuilding the internal movement in Egypt. Egypt has 4 main political trends. We have an Islamist trend, we have a liberal one, we have a leftist, and a nationalist. Amongst each of those 4 trends, there are different levels of moderation and radicalization. The more radical elements in each of them tries to exclude the others and uses harsh language, including accusations of treason and infidelity and everything. So, but the moderates could work together. The moderates of earlier generations were able to form Kifaya and alliances for reform, and the reform fronts that were formed over the past 3 or 4 years. They were not strong enough, but things that are coming from younger generations have proven to be even more efficient. I mean, you have the Facebook activism. I'm not sure whether you have been following up on that. Through Facebook, there have been a couple of major strikes organized in Egypt in last April and May. You have the blogosphere and the torture scandals it has been revealing. Torture in police stations by police officers. Again, the Egyptian regime's response to that was very interesting, because they did not decide to investigate the cases. They decided to ban the use of phones with cameras in police stations. That was the Egyptian regime's decision. So phones that have cameras are not allowed in police stations in Egypt. Actually, that's basically it. That's what I have to say, and I'd like to take it to questions from there. Thank you.
Can you just talk a little bit more about the Facebook? What makes Facebook so different than, I mean, even when I'm there a year and a half ago last time, we were talking, no one mentioned Facebook. Then all of a sudden, about 8-9 months ago, it's Facebook. Before that, it was just blogs. Now it's Facebook. What's the difference between Facebook versus just blog? Is it the community networking through Facebook? I mean,
maybe it's just called the ability to arrange events from there and call people for events. I don't know. I mean,
this used to be done through SMS.
I never liked Facebook, and then I'm currently not working in Egypt. I'm working in the Gulf, so I only used Facebook as a way of just keeping in touch, staying in touch with my friends in Egypt. But then I liked that thing, and I thought that I could use it for other reasons. And Ala Abdel Fattah, one of the good friends and bloggers in Egypt, I sent him an invitation for a cause, and he replied sending me a message telling me, I don't think that's useful by any means, and I don't think Facebook is useful, and it couldn't be used as a means of activism. So I told him, let's give it a try, we're not losing anything. So he told me, you give it a try, if it works, I'm in. So actually, I gave up as well, because he wasn't that much encouraging, and Ala is one of the leading bloggers in Egypt. But later on, a couple of months later or something, there was a call for a strike by workers at Al Mahalla, textile workers at Al Mahalla, and then their issue with the government has been resolved. But this call for the strike was already transferred to Facebook, where young activists who probably have no political affiliations with any of the existing political groups in the country started circulating that for a few weeks, and then nobody thought that was important until one day before the day it was supposed to take place, which was the 6th of April, one day before, one day prior to that, the Egyptian regime just realized that this is getting way too much. So they had this news piece on the front page of Al-Ahram, which is the largest newspaper in Egypt, and it never appeared online. This piece of news only appeared in the printed newspaper, never appeared online, so that international readers, like probably everyone here, wouldn't be able to read it. It was just the Ministry of Interior threatening anyone who would take place in this strike, threatening anyone who would not go to his work the next day. It's a very, very harsh language. A friend of mine, I wasn't in Egypt at the time, but a friend of mine sent me the piece. And then surprisingly, the next day, it was really effective, specifically in Mahalla where it originated, but also all around the country. It was effective to the effect that people decided that we're having one on the 4th of May. The 4th of May is a very significant day in Egypt because it's President Mubarak's birthday. It's Gamal Mubarak, his son, who is expected to be president. It's his wedding anniversary, and it comes just so. I mean, that was powerful to the extent that in order to calm things down, only one day before that, or actually 2 days, on the 2nd of May, President Mubarak decides to raise salaries for the civil servants by 30% in order to calm things down. Actually, he does that, and then a couple of days later, just when things, nobody joins the strike, a couple of days later, he raises the prices by around 30 or 40%. So it's all, it all goes back to as it was. But that tells you about how strong this thing was. A young lady was arrested because she was the one who started that group. Her name was Isra Abdel Fattah. She was kept in prison for a couple of, actually she disappeared for some time, and no one knew where she was. And that's a phenomenon of Facebook activists disappear. They don't get arrested, they disappear. And Muhammad Rifat, a young Brotherhood member, and a friend of mine, also was arrested because they were calling for another strike on the 23rd of July, and he disappeared. And then a couple of days, or actually more than that, maybe a week later, we knew that he was in a prison in the desert outside Cairo, actually midway between Cairo and Marsa Matruh. It's Wadi Natron prison. We knew that he was there around 200 kilometers outside Cairo. That's how it goes. I mean, he was released later on. He was released actually almost a week ago. But that's why is it Facebook now, and what is the next thing? Actually, I might have no answers to that, but it's really interesting to see how it's moving from one area. And the blogosphere, after all the attention it got, and after all the importance and momentum it brought to the Egyptian political arena a couple of years ago, it's becoming to lose grounds to other tools, including the Facebook.
Let me just say, anyone wants any information about the strike in Mahalla, there was a couple of great articles written in English by Professor Joel Bynum from Stanford University that are online at the Middle East Report online, Merrick.org. So a very fascinating phenomenon.